My husband and I are surgeons, the kind of people who pride ourselves on logic, precision, and the sterile safety of our environment. We live in a neighborhood where the doors stay unlocked, and the silence of the night is usually just that, silence. Our 4-year-old son, Monty, was the center of that orderly world, a bright, active boy who filled our home with the chaotic, beautiful noise of childhood. But lately, the silence in our house has started to feel heavy, like a held breath that refuses to be released. It began with the babysitter, Diana, who seemed like a godsend. Polite, punctual, and seemingly adored by Monty. For months, she was the invisible hand that kept our domestic life running. While we were buried under hospital shifts, I remember the relief of coming home to find them playing puzzles. The soft glow of the living room lamp illuminating their focused faces. It felt perfect, but perfection is often just a thin veneer, and I was the one who started to peel it back. It wasn't a sudden explosion of horror, but a series of small, jagged cracks in our routine. It started on a Tuesday during a bath. As I scrubbed Monty's back, my hand brushed against something rough. A jagged, ink-black symbol etched onto his shoulder blade with a permanent marker. When I asked him about it, he didn't cry or look ashamed. He just stared at me with a strange, hollow calmness, claiming it was a matching tattoo with Diana. I brushed it off as a childish game, a silly imitation of an adult's whim, but the ink felt cold under my fingertips. Then came the window a few days later. While cleaning the exterior glass of Monty's room, I found a cross-like figure wedged into the frame. It wasn't just wood, it was bound together with coarse, dark strands of hair. My heart hammered against my ribs as I threw it into the trash, telling myself it was just debris caught in the wind. I didn't tell my husband, Simon. I didn't want to sound hysterical. But the unease had already taken root, a slow-growing vine in the back of my mind. The final shift happened last night, when Simon, pale and visibly shaken, pulled me aside. He had caught Monty sitting upright in his bed in the dead of night, whispering rhythmic, guttural prayers that no 4-year-old could possibly know, in a voice that sounded far too old for his small, fragile frame. The air in the room felt thin, charged with a static that made the hair on my arms stand up. And for the first time, I realized that the person living in our house wasn't the boy I had tucked in just hours before. The shift in Monty wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing erosion. One afternoon, while I was pruning the hedges, the silence from the backyard felt heavy, almost pressurized. Monty sat on his swing, his small frame motionless, staring at the sky with a hollow intensity that made the air feel thin. When a sparrow plummeted from the branches, hitting the grass with a sickening thud, I rushed over, my surgeon's instincts kicking in to save the fragile life. But as I knelt, Monty leaned in, his eyes devoid of the warmth I had known just weeks prior. "It is in pain, Mom," he whispered, his voice devoid of a child's innocence. "It should die." That sentence didn't just hang in the air, it curdled it. I looked at my 4-year-old and saw a stranger wearing his skin. When I pressed him for an explanation, he didn't cry or look confused. He simply smiled, a thin, jagged expression that felt like a serrated blade against my nerves. That night, the house felt different. The shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch longer, and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock sounded like a countdown. We fired Diana, the babysitter, convinced she was the source of this rot. But the replacement, Corey, only brought the darkness closer. The phone call from Diana while I was at the hospital was the final fracture in my composure. Her voice was a low, oily rasp, warning me that the new girl couldn't protect him. I dismissed it as a pathetic, desperate threat. But the cold dread in my gut told a different story. It was then that I remembered the mark, the small ink-stained star inside a circle I'd found on Monty's shoulder weeks ago, which I'd foolishly brushed off as a temporary tattoo. Simon pulled it up on his phone, his face draining of color as the search results flickered on the screen. A sigil of a fringe cult, a gateway for something far worse than bad influence. The drive home was a blur of hyperventilating panic. Every red light felt like an eternity, and the static on the radio seemed to pulse in time with my frantic heartbeat. When we pulled into the driveway, the house was a tomb, pitch black, silent, and suffocating. As we pushed through the front door, the smell hit us first. a cloying, metallic stench of burning wax and something else, something ancient and foul. We found Corey slumped on the living room sofa, a dark bloom of blood matting her hair, her breathing shallow and ragged. I didn't wait for Simon. I sprinted toward Monty's room, my lungs burning, my mind screaming for a reality that no longer existed. I kicked the door open, and the sight inside stopped my heart cold. The room was a labyrinth of flickering candles, the air thick with the acrid smoke of incense. Monty was curled in Diana's lap, his eyes glazed in a trance-like stupor, while she chanted in a rhythmic, guttural cadence that vibrated in my very marrow. A jagged knife glinted in the candlelight, pressed firmly against my son's throat. She looked up at me, her eyes reflecting the flames, and laughed, a sound that shattered the last of my logic, and left me staring directly into the abyss. The air in that house didn't just feel stagnant, it felt heavy, as if the oxygen itself had been replaced by the weight of something long dead. When I stepped over the threshold, the silence wasn't empty, it was expectant. The little boy, barely 3 years old, stood there like a ghost in his own hallway. His skin was translucent, stretched thin over bones that seemed too fragile to hold him upright, and his eyes were wide, hollowed out by a hunger that went far deeper than his stomach. He didn't look at me, he looked through me, his gaze tethered to the bedroom door at the end of the hall. "My mom left with the angry man," he whispered, his voice a brittle reed. "My dad is sick, he hasn't come out in 2 days." I tried to rationalize it, a messy divorce, a father spiraling into a depressive episode, a child neglected in the crossfire. But as I walked deeper into the house, the logic began to fray. The living room was a tomb of forgotten routines, half-empty cups coated in a film of dust, furniture pushed against the walls as if to create a barricade, and a pervasive metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. I knocked on the bedroom door, my knuckles rapping against wood that felt unnaturally cold. "Sir, it is Ellie. I'm here for the babysitting job," I called out, my voice sounding thin and intrusive in the oppressive quiet. The response came instantly, but it wasn't a human voice. It was a wet, rattling rasp, a sound that seemed to vibrate from the floorboards themselves. "I'm fine," the man wheezed, the words slurring together, as if he were struggling to push them past a throat filled with gravel. "Just privacy, rest, feed the boy. He hasn't eaten in 2 days." He directed me to the kitchen, his instructions clipped and devoid of any parental warmth. He told me to find a phone directory on the couch to reach his mother. But as I turned back toward the living room, the boy didn't move. He remained frozen, pointing a trembling finger at that bedroom door. It was then I noticed the scratches, deep, jagged gouges near the bottom of the door frame, as if someone had been trying to claw their way out, or perhaps keep something from getting in. The sick father wasn't just resting, he was hiding. And the more I looked at the boy's terrified, vacant expression, the more I realized that the man behind that door wasn't the one in control of this house. The motive behind the silence wasn't just fear. It was a desperate, hollowed-out preservation. As I sat there, the kitchen's neglect, the crusty, abandoned plates and the stale air, began to tell a story far more jagged than a simple domestic dispute. Ted, with his hollowed-out eyes, and the way he devoured that pasta like a starving animal, was the living evidence of a house that had been rotting from the inside out for days. When I pulled him into my lap, the sudden, sharp intake of his breath wasn't just from hunger. It was the flinch of a child who had learned that touch was usually a precursor to pain. I traced the bruises across his back, and the reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just neglect, it was a calculated cruelty. Ted's voice, small and trembling, didn't speak of a father's warmth, but of a shadow. He hated the angry man, he hated his mother, and he whispered that they had made his dad sick. The motive was chillingly clear. His mother and her lover hadn't just abandoned a child. They had systematically erased a man, leaving a boy to act as a silent sentry for a corpse. They didn't just want the father gone, they wanted the evidence of their betrayal buried, under the guise of a normal, messy household, betting on the fact that a child's terror would keep the secret locked behind that bedroom door. The true horror wasn't just the violence. It was the perversion of parental duty. The mother had weaponized the child's fear, forcing him to witness the aftermath of their brutality. while she slipped away into the night with her accomplice. They left Ted behind, not because they forgot him, but because he was the perfect, terrified witness who wouldn't dare speak. When Ted told me his dad was still in the room, still talking through the closed door, I realized with a sickening jolt that the man I had spoken to earlier wasn't a living person at all. It was the echo of a tragedy, a psychic imprint left by a father, whose final, desperate motive was to ensure his son wasn't left to rot in that house alone. He had been waiting, not for a babysitter, but for a witness, someone to finally break the cycle of silence and pull his son out of the darkness. The silence in that house wasn't just quiet. It was a physical weight, thick and suffocating, pressing against my chest the moment Mr. Wood's car tires crunched away into the darkness. I stood in the center of that opulent, sterile living room, the kind of luxury that felt more like a showroom than a home. Marla and Roni were still sitting on the couch, motionless, their eyes fixed on me with a glassy, hollow intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. They didn't fidget, they didn't ask for cartoons, they didn't even blink. When I tried to engage them, the boy, Roni, just stared through me, his silence vibrating with a terror so profound it felt contagious. It wasn't the shyness of a toddler. It was the guarded, calculated stillness of a prisoner who had learned that any movement could invite punishment. I felt a cold prickle of dread crawl up my spine. Why would a father leave his children in such a state? Why did they look at me not as a babysitter, but as a potential threat or perhaps a witness? I walked over to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing too loudly on the marble floor, and that is when I saw it. Tucked away on the counter, hidden behind a decorative vase, was a stack of documents. My curiosity, fueled by a sudden, sharp intuition, got the better of me. I flipped through the pages. They weren't business contracts. They were adoption records, forged medical histories, and photographs of children, dozens of them, with prices scrawled in the margins. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a home, it was a transit point, a cold, clinical warehouse for human lives. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Mr. Wood wasn't a father. He was a broker, and those twins weren't his children. They were the next shipment, waiting to be moved into the void. The strictness I had witnessed earlier wasn't discipline. It was the systematic breaking of their spirits, to ensure they wouldn't scream when the time came to leave. As I stared at the documents, the front door lock clicked, a sound that usually meant safety, but now sounded like a death sentence. I wasn't just babysitting for the night. I had walked into the heart of a trafficking ring, and the man who had just left was already on his way back to finish the transaction. The police sirens that night didn't sound like a rescue. They sounded like a jagged tear in the fabric of a reality I thought I understood, as the flashing blue and red lights bled through the living room curtains, painting the walls in rhythmic, sickly pulses. I stood there, clutching Marla and Roni, their small, trembling hands gripping my sleeves, as if I were the only solid thing left in a dissolving world. Mr. Wood, the man who had played the role of a grieving, protective father, with such chilling precision, was led out in handcuffs. He didn't scream, he didn't struggle. He just looked back at me with a hollow, predatory calm that made my blood turn to ice. It was the look of a man who viewed children not as lives, but as inventory, as assets to be liquidated in the shadows of a world that rarely looks closely enough. Even now, months later, the normal life I returned to feels like a thin veneer over a bottomless pit. I still catch myself checking the locks on my own doors 3 or 4 times before bed. The phantom weight of those children's gazes, that statue-like, expectant stare haunting the quiet corners of my home. When I visit Marla and Roni at their new, loving foster home, they still call me Mom. It is a title I never earned, yet it carries the crushing gravity of the life they were almost denied. Every time they say it, I'm pulled back to that kitchen, to the realization that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones hiding under the bed. They are the ones who walk through your front door, smile at your children, and offer to keep them safe, while they calculate the price of their disappearance. The case made the local news for a week, then vanished, swallowed by the relentless churn of daily headlines. But for me, the story never ended. I look at the empty space in my schedule, the mundane chores of my own life, and I see the fragility of it all. We live in a society that prides itself on security, yet we are constantly walking past the invisible cages, built by men like Mr. Wood,